This is the KC Show. I'm Kyle Cushman, and welcome into the season preview for the New York Sirens, who begin play on the 25-26 season today, if you're watching this the date that this one is posted. A wild offseason for the New York Sirens. Of course, the big extension for Sarah Fillier, picking first overall again, picking third overall because of a huge trade, some controversial decisions in the expansion process, all of that and more we're going to get into today. And I think it's probably best to kind of start off by recapping what an insane offseason that this was. You look at the New York Sirens scoring charts from last season, and 4 of the top 5 scorers are all gone. I believe the stat is the only player who's returning from last year's roster who scored 3 or more goals last season is Sarah Fillier. Significant changes after a second straight year where the Sirens finished bottom of the standings. And we'll see if the quick rebuild pays dividends this season. So going out the door in the expansion process, Jesse Eldridge, Alex Carpenter, Gabby Rosenthal, and Corrine Schroeder all leaving in the expansion process. Abby Rock traded to Montreal. And then Jay Downey Landry, Chloe Arard, Elizabeth Giguere, Nora Toulouse terminating her contract. The previous players all leaving in free agency. Brooke Hobson also leaving in free agency, as does Abby Levy. What does that mean? Well, basically 90%, it feels like, of the forward group is different. Most of the defense is the same, but Ella Shelton is gone, so that's a huge change to the lineup. And then you have a new starting goaltender as well, and 2 out of the 3 goaltenders are new. So many changes on this roster. So, for the New York Sirens here, it's crazy. Like, I kind of lost my thought there because there's so many different directions to take this. They ultimately decided, and they being Pascal Daoust as the general manager, decided that the group that they had wasn't working and you needed a fresh start. You had some strong pieces to remain on the core in terms of your Sarah Filliers and your Micah zandee-harts, but the rest of it was either expendable or needed to change. I still think that the decision to unprotect Alex Carpenter is a bold one and not a decision I would make. I think the decision to trade Ella Shelton is a bold one. But I think you have to also look at it through the lens of what were the futures for those players in New York. Was Alex Carpenter going to stay past this season on her contract in New York? Was Ella Shelton going to stay on her contract past this season in New York? And if the answer to those questions is no, well, then you protect the players that you believe can and will stay, like they did with zandee-hart and Fillier, of course. And you go ahead and you trade Ella Shelton after protecting her because you know you can get immense value out of that trade. And you let Alex Carpenter go in the expansion process and you kind of rebuild from there. And I think if that's the perspective, then I think it's a great job that Pascal Daoust did. I think if you had a chance to retain Alex Carpenter, I think you have to keep her. I think if you have a chance to retain a player like Ella Shelton, I think you have to try to keep that kind of player. That's not to say somebody like a Micah zandee-hart is a bad player by any means, because you would be protecting probably Alex Carpenter over Micah zandee-hart. But I think the impact that she can have on a game is lesser than Alex Carpenter at her high end. And I think it's lesser than the impact that Ella Shelton can have at her high end. And we saw Ella Shelton protected in the expansion process as well. So overall there, bold moves, certainly, but it's a very exciting roster coming into the season. Let me get to the players that are in the door for the Sirens this year. Trading for Kristen O'Neill in the Abby Rock swap. I think that's a really intriguing fit that gives a very different dynamic down the middle that the Sirens have been lacking in their history. Bringing back Savannah Norcross after she was with the team in year number 1. She goes to Sweden last season after being cut. She's back on the roster. But then first overall pick, Kristina Kaltunkova. Third overall pick, Casey O'Brien in the Ella Shelton trade. ninth overall pick, Ann Cherkowski. 3 of the top forwards all go to the New York Sirens. Also adding Maddie Wheeler and Anna Bergman in the draft process as well. It's a damn shame that McKenna Webster can't or won't be able to play this season because of her field hockey commitments and her goal of making the Olympics in field hockey, because she would be such a great fit on this roster in the top 6 and would absolutely be one of my gals, except she's not playing ice hockey this season in the professional ranks. So she's not going to be somebody that factors into this roster in that regard. On defense, signing Jinsey Rose, drafting Dale Ross, and signing Nicole Valario as an undrafted free agent. She likely shifts to the reserve when Dale Ross is available again. Drafting Callie Shanahan and Kaylee Doyle as well to be backups to Kaylee Osborne. Okay, let's get to my 5 big questions. The first one kind of goes with kind of my reaction there while going through all those moves. Is this too much change in one summer? It feels like all the forwards are different. It's Sarah Fillier's back. Peyton Levis is back. Elle Hartje is back. Emmy Fecto's back. Kayla Vespa's back. Taylor Gerard was traded for last season, but is back. So that's 5 or 6 forwards that are back. Obviously, a lot of the defense is back, but Ella Shelton's gone, and your starting goaltender is gone. Is that too much change in one offseason? I think given the fact that there's so much change around the league, that it might not be as big of a concern. But I do think the fact that you have so many new faces here, it almost feels like an expansion team with how many different faces there's in, but they do have the baggage of the 2 previous seasons. I don't think it's going to be too much change in one summer, but I do think that that is something that could be a cause for concern in terms of, was it too aggressive and too much too quickly by reshaping the Sirens in this way? Which kind of ties into this next part. And I think if it isn't too much change, then it's probably because the youth excels right away. And my question is simply, can the youth excel in this league? This is one of the youngest, if not the youngest roster in the PWHL. Like, you look and there's no player that are in their 30s. There's no player that's even 29 on this roster. You look at Micah Zandee-Hart, who's 28, as one of the veterans on this team. Sarah Fillier is one of the veterans on this team, and she's going into her 2nd season in the PWHL. There's so much youth on this team that makes it such an exciting roster in terms of the potential that they have, but it also means that there's not a lot of experience throughout the lineup. It means that there isn't as many veterans to lean on in some trying moments. And it means that the youth is going to have to come through against some very veteran teams. And maybe the trial by fire is going to work for the New York Sirens, and the youth will excel in that regard, and it's going to be great. We saw what Sarah Fillier was able to do last season. But I also think Sarah Fillier is a pretty one-of-one type player. So how much of the youth around her can excel this season and push the Sirens not just out of the bottom place in the league, but into a playoff spot? Because it isn't just about getting out of last place for the New York Sirens here. It's about actually making the playoffs. And I think there's a path, certainly, to make the playoffs here for the Sirens, but ultimately it's going to come down to how much the youth excels right out of the gate in this league, which I think is a league that still favors the more veteran teams, at least from what we've seen to this point in the league's history. To the next point, as talked about, very youthful team. The future is very bright for the Sirens if they're able to keep these key pieces all together, but can they do it immediately? Kind of ties into the previous part, but I'm going to focus more on the potential of this team. Sarah Fillier is a top 3 to 4 player in the world. She is a remarkable offensive talent who is probably going to win MVPs and scoring titles throughout her career. Kristina Koltunkova, a very intriguing first overall pick, given her size, given her physicality, given her scoring ability, but also comes from a conference in the ECAC who has had some players, in particular some Colgate players. You look at Danielle Serdachny, has had some struggles transitioning to the league. And is she closer to Fillier or Serdachny in that range of players coming into the league? What can Casey O'Brien do in year number 1? What can Ann Cherkowski do in year number 1? Those kind of things are the question of all those players I think are going to be in this league for a very long time and are going to be important players in this league for a long time. But it's a big difference between being that kind of player in your second, third, fourth season in the league when you're in your kind of mid to later 20s and you kind of have your footing under you. And I think it's a very different thing to do that when you're 22 or 23 years old, fresh out of college, and on a team that has finished bottom of the standings in back-to-back seasons. It is one thing to be a top end rookie on a team like, say, the Minnesota Frost, who have so many veterans around that group, who have the success behind them to kind of help prop you up as a rookie. I think it's a very different thing to be a top rookie on that kind of team in that kind of environment and be a top end rookie that's helping propel a team to the playoffs rather than being a secondary player on that kind of roster. And the Sirens are asking their youth to try and do that immediately out of the gate. The future's bright with the likes of Fillier and Koltunkova and O'Brien and Cherkowski, and on defense, Nyland Pearson and those kind of players, and Kaylee Osborne between the pipes as well. But there's a lot of players that are going to have to learn the pro game early on this season. And is it asking too much of them too soon to try and have the expectation of making the playoffs for the first time this season? I think that is the big question here for the New York Sirens. And that's my number 3 big questions. To the fourth one, and I kind of mentioned it there, Koltunkova, is she closer to Fillier or Serdachny in terms of her first season in the league? Koltunkova is a very interesting case because we haven't seen her on the international stage very much in her career because she took that gap from the Czech national team. She looked great at the World Championships this past year, returning to the team. She, in some European hockey tour games, has been a dominant shot generator and really puck dominant and showing her strength and her speed and her offensive ability. But we also saw a lot of that from Danielle Serdachny in college, and kind of similar to what Koltunkova has done. And Serdachny really struggled to find her role in the PWHL last season. Obviously, Serdachny is going to be and is already a great player in the league, but she didn't have the impact that you kind of hoped for or expected in year number 1, for her at least. Is Koltunkova closer on that scale to Serdachny, who only scored 2 goals in the regular season last year after having great collegiate numbers at Colgate? Or is Koltunkova closer to the Sarah Fillier, who's a co-leader in league scoring? Obviously, don't expect that for Koltunkova, but can Koltunkova be a top 10 scorer in the league, a physical presence, somebody that completely changes the dynamic of this team in a bunch of different facets? I think she's somewhere on that scale in between. I would be surprised in a positive way if she's closer to Fillier. I would be surprised in a negative way if she's closer to what Serdachny did in her rookie season. I'm expecting somewhere in between. But if you can get double-digit goals from Koltunkova in year number 1, I think that is a huge success. But then you're also looking at players like O'Brien and such that are going to supplement. It's not just Koltunkova, but specifically talking about Koltunkova here because she was the number 1 pick. I personally had her as my number 3 prospect in the draft. I had Haley Wynn number 1, I had Casey O'Brien number 2, I had Koltunkova number 3. I think obviously it doesn't matter as much because you still got Casey O'Brien at number 3 as well, but the number 1 overall label is significant, and it's going to be interesting to see where Koltunkova falls on that line and if another top Colgate star struggles in their transition to the professional game. I think that's something that's a bit intriguing to watch. In terms of Serdachny, I'm very high on her talent. I think we saw it already in the first game of the season. If you're watching this, after that great performance that Serdachny had in game number 1, when it comes to Serdachny, I think it's almost the fit specifically with the Ottawa Charge last season that was the issue, rather than her transition to the league. But there is some onus on herself in terms of her ability to fit in that system and was unable to do that. Obviously, the big difference factor here is that Greg Fargo, the head coach here, coached Koltunkova for almost her entire college career. So there's a big history there. There's a trust between both sides there. And I think that's a huge plus in the back pocket for Koltunkova. And I think that's one of the reasons why she's going to be on the positive side of that scale this season rather than the lower end. But it's still something that I'm keeping an eye on because I did have her as my number 3 prospect in the draft, and she went number 1. And the fifth big question here is between the pipes. You lose Corrine Schroeder, who, even though she had some down moments in her PWHL tenure with the Sirens, was a goaltender that could win you a game and had a bunch of shutouts and got New York some more results than they probably deserved at times. Also didn't help them out of some spots where she allowed 3, 4, 5 goals. And you think about that big 9-game losing streak as an example. I believe in Kaylee Osborne's talent. You look at her results at Colgate, very good goaltender there. There's a reason that Team Canada has her as the 4th goaltender right now on the Olympic training block and gave her a start in the rivalry series because they want to see if she should be on the roster as the 3rd goaltender. The fact that the Sirens were comfortable leaving Schroeder available in the expansion process, I think shows the belief in Kaylee Osborne. I think it also shows some of the players that they had to protect at other positions. But they're also lucky to come out of the expansion process by keeping Kaylee Osborne as well, because they weren't able to protect her throughout that process. I think she's definitely a starter in this league, but it's a question of whether she's the 6th, 7th, 8th goaltender in terms of the starting caliber in the league, or if she's the 3rd, 4th type starter in the league. I think she's more the 5th or 6th best starter in the league. You kind of look around the league and let's just kind of pick it out. Why not right now? Erin Frankel, I'm taking over her. Anne Renee Dabian, I'm taking over her. Gwyneth Phillips, I'm taking over her. Emmerin Smashmeyer, I'm taking over her. So that's 4 right there. And then Corrine Schroeder, I would take over her just given Schroeder's history. But I think Kaylee Osborne has the ability to put up some similar numbers to what Schroeder did last season and maybe even be a little bit better and maybe usurp her in kind of the pecking order of the goaltenders around the league. So I would have her as the 6th goaltender in the league then to begin this season behind ahead of Elaine Chuli and Maddie Rooney there. Just given some of the results that Maddie Rooney has had in the regular season, hasn't had the super high end she has in the playoffs. So even you could say Maddie Rooney over Kaylee Osborne as well. So somewhere in that 5th to 7th range in terms of the pecking order of goaltenders that are starters around the league to begin the season. Can she establish herself as a legit number 1 first and foremost? And can she change the perception of her in the league in terms of that pecking order in the league? Can she clearly jump a Maddie Rooney? Can she even maybe jump her former goaltending partner in Corrine Schroeder and push into that top 5 conversation? I think if she is doing that, then the Sirens are probably in a competitive position this year. And if she's not, then they're probably in a pretty similar situation in terms of the standings as to what they've been already in their history. So let's get to my gals here. If it's your first time tuning in, this is just a segment where I highlight 3 players on each roster that I either have a particular like for in terms of watching them, players that I believe in that have played lesser roles that I think can play higher in the lineup, those kind of things. Not necessarily keying in on the star players that are established in the league, talking about some players that are either lesser known or kind of more depth players that I think can take a step up the lineup. Now, that being said, my gal here is Casey O'Brien, who is a record holder at Wisconsin, Patty Kazmaier winner and the 3rd overall pick. The reason I have her here is because there's a bit of a perception about her game about maybe struggling to transition to the pro game because she isn't the physically dominant player like a Kaltunkova, and she isn't the biggest player. And I think a lot of people look at her results at Wisconsin and say, okay, that's Caroline Harvey, that's Layla Edwards, that's Lacey Eden, that's Kirsten Sims. But O'Brien was the one that won the Patty Kazmaier last year. Her head coach, Mark Johnson, said she was the best player in the league last season, in college hockey last season. And I really trust that kind of person to talk about her. I really believe in her talent here. I do think, especially the way that things have gone in the PWHL here, where the tide is swinging towards bigger players and physicality and strength and some things like that. But let's not forget that there are a lot of either average or smaller players in the league that are doing pretty darn good things in this league as well. And I think the offensive ability that she brings, her commitment to continuing to prove and being a good 200-foot player is important down the middle. This league isn't just about size and physicality. It's about being a good hockey player, and clearly Casey O'Brien is a very good hockey player. There might be a little bit more growing pains early on in her tenure versus somebody who's more physically dominant, like a Kaltunkova, or versus somebody like a Sarah Fillier, who has so much experience at the international level playing against these top end players. There might be a little bit more of an adjustment period for Casey O'Brien, but I think overall, I think coming out of this draft class, she's going to be one of, if not the top scoring rookie this season. I think she's going to be firmly in the mix to be Rookie of the Year. And I'm excited to see what she does this upcoming season to kind of either silence some doubters or kind of prove people that she wasn't just a product of the Wisconsin environment, that she's a legit driver herself. And there's a reason that she won the Patty Kazmaier. And I think she's going to be a great player in this league for many years to come. I think she's going to be a great fit either alongside Kaltunkova or Sarah Fillier. And so I'm putting her here in the My Gals category because I firmly believe in her ability to make an immediate impact in this league. I had her as my number 2 player in the draft, my number 1 forward. I believe in her game to make an immediate impact here. Continuing on to maybe the complete opposite end of the spectrum, it's Savannah Norcross as a bottom of the lineup player. Coming back over from Sweden last year where she put up 18 points in 13 games, 8 points in 9 playoff games. And I think that just kind of showed what Norcross can do with a little bit of opportunity, obviously, against lesser competition. But I don't really view her as like this top 9 player or anything like that. But I think she's just a useful bottom of the lineup player who brings speed and can bring some energy and maybe can chip in on a penalty kill if you need her to, with her speed and kind of her ability to maybe disrupt in that regard. I think she's a player that can play on a fourth line or give you some minutes as the extra forward. I'm not expecting her to put up any gaudy point totals or even be a top 9 player or anything like that. But I just think that she's the kind of player that you can plug into a bottom of a lineup here, can bring you some pace, can help you win a shift. And she's not going to play probably much more than 7 or 8 minutes in a game. But in those minutes, I think she can be noticeable in terms of the impact of the speed that she can bring. So she's somebody that I like in terms of what I saw a little bit from her in season number 1. She's coming back after a year or at least a partial year in Sweden where she at least got some reps playing a bunch more than she did in the PWHL. Again, she's not going to play a lot in the league, even if she gets into the lineup. But I think if she either gets some fourth line minutes or dresses as the extra forward, I think she could give you some useful minutes and be an energetic player that helps you win some games in terms of just turning the tide or helping you gain some momentum as an energetic player. So that brings me to the last My Gal here, and it's Maya Nyland Persson. A Swedish defender, finished the season injured, missed the World Championship as a result. The one asterisk here is I don't know how much of her summer was interrupted due to the injury she had at the end of the regular season or in the regular season that ended her season. If she wasn't able to have much of an off season, then there might be some issues at the beginning of the season as she just ramps up. But in terms of her ability last season, she was just a steady defensive player in terms of somebody that was able to retrieve pucks and push them up the ice. Not everyone is the defensive player like a Rory Gilday or a Lee Steckline, who's this physical, imposing force that can separate you from the puck and kind of turn the puck up the ice that way. I think I have a lot of time for some defenders that can help get those defensive results in terms of being quick back to pucks, being quick on retrievals, getting the puck back up the ice in a different motion. I kind of view her in a similar light to somebody like Callie Flanagan on the Toronto Scepters, and that's somebody that I highlighted in the My Gal segment for the Scepters there as well. She's still a young defender, only 25 years old, didn't have any North American experience before coming over to the league last season, coming over from the SDHL. So I think the experience last year, getting to actually experience what the league is like, is going to really help her this year in terms of the preparation or just knowing what to be ready for over the course of this offseason. And coming into this season, the combination of her good defensive results last season, her quick skating and puck moving ability and all of that, and her fit alongside Micah Zandee-Hart on the top pairing, I think she has a lot more offensive potential to show, given the offensive role that is going to be up for grabs with Ella Shelton going out the door. I think Jinsey Rose is probably going to be the one that takes over primarily in that role, but I'd like to see Maya Nyland Persson get some more offensive looks because I think she's a really solid defender, and clearly the Sirens believe that as well because they extended her contract by 1 year. So she's under contract for 3 more seasons, including this one. Just a player that I think has a lot of potential in this league to be an impact top 4 defender. I like her fit alongside Zandee-Hart, and I think she's going to have an even better season than she had last year. So let's continue on to my projected lineup. One thing I really like about the addition of Kristen O'Neill here, who I haven't really gotten into too much here, is her potential fit with Sarah Fillier. O'Neill just really struggled to find the score sheet in Montreal, so I think it's going to be huge for the Sirens to try and get the most out of her in terms of getting her confidence level back up. And one of the ways to do that is by playing her with somebody like Sarah Fillier. But one of the things about the Sirens here is that they clearly want to play with youth, and with youth comes pace. And a lot of these players on this roster play with pace. Kristen O'Neill is one of the most experienced players on this roster, arguably the most experienced forward on this roster. And as a result, I think she's going to be leaned on in some of those key situations defensively, of course, which she was in Montreal and what she's very good at, and kind of the element that the Sirens were lacking in terms of that defensive center that they can bring, but alongside somebody like Sarah Fillier, and that's the projected lineup that I have here. I really like the idea of those two working in terms of their speed together and getting some more offense out of Kristen O'Neill. It looks like Peyton Levis is going to start on the wing there for the New York Sirens. I would personally have Ann Czerkowski on that wing. Just gives you a bit more offensive potential. A great shot from Czerkowski gives O'Neill 2 great passing options. And I think the speed and kind of the offensive ability of Czerkowski would be a good fit on that top line. I get why Levis is there to try and spread things out throughout the lineup, but that's what I would go with on the top line. To my second line, I really like the idea of starting O'Brien and Kaltunkova together. Could easily switch O'Neill and O'Brien there and maybe have O'Brien in a more offensive line with Sarah Fillier and maybe have O'Neill on a defensive line with Kaltunkova. But I actually like having Fillier in that role in terms of the more defensive line, just because she has the experience in this league, and having the more offensive line of O'Brien and Kaltunkova probably getting some easier starts just because they're going to be adapting to the league. But I do think ultimately that O'Brien can handle herself defensively in this league, given some time to adjust. On the wing here, I would actually have Maddie Wheeler. Obviously, I would ideally have McKenna Webster here. I love her game. I love her speed. I love her scoring ability. She's not available this season because of her field hockey commitment. So I would have a different former teammate of Casey O'Brien's on this line in Maddie Wheeler, just somebody that played at Ohio State and Wisconsin. So somebody that comes from very good programs, has a history with O'Brien. I think Maddie Wheeler would just be a good complementary piece on the left wing with O'Brien and Kaltunkova playing the right wing. I like her on her offside. She's a left-hand shot. I like her playing on the right wing actually more than the left, just because it gives her the one-timer option. And I think that's something that she really likes to do, either the one-timer on the right wing or cutting to the middle from the right wing into the middle of the ice. I think those are 2 things that Kaltunkova does very well. To the third line in this group, I would have Anna Bargman with Elle Hartje and Peyton Levis in this case, the Yale connection of Bargman and Hartje. Hartje moves to the middle after primarily playing on the wing last season. She was great at the faceoff dot in college. I fully expect her to be the full-time third-line center going forward, and I would have Peyton Levis on this line. I just haven't seen enough offensive production from Levis in the PWHL to warrant her continuing to play on a line with Sarah Fillier after doing that last season and playing in kind of an elevated role the year prior as well. And then the fourth line, just kind of an energy line. Emmy Fecteau with Kayla Vespa and Taylor Gerard. You could easily move Gerard up to that third line instead of Anna Bargman. I like the idea of that Yale connection of Bargman and Hartje, though, just given some of their chemistry going back to their Yale days. Gerard, probably just a fourth line player in this role, but you could easily swap her and maybe give her more of a look if you can see, maybe get her going a little bit more in a third line role. But I think this is a line that probably doesn't play too much, but when it does, is kind of out there to give you some energy, and Savannah Norcross, as I mentioned there, as the extra forward. On defense, I'm going with the lineup to begin the season, which is Micah Zandee-Hart with Maya Nyland-Parenson. Would not change that regardless. Jinsey Rose with Jamie Bourbonnais, and then Lauren Bernard with Allison Simpson. The one change that I would make is when Dale Ross is available, I would have Dale Ross play on that second pairing actually with Jamie Bourbonnais, and then I would have Jinsey Rose drop down to the third pairing with Allison Simpson. I really like Ross's defensive game. I think that she could play with Bourbonnais and give her more free reign to open up offensively and get more out of Bourbonnais there. You could easily have her play with Jinsey Rose instead and kind of get a similar impact there. But overall, that's what I would do on defense. And at forward, Kaylee Osborne, obviously the clear-cut starter. Callie Shanahan likely to back her up, and then Kaylee Doyle as the extra goaltender there. So, all that being said, all the changes this offseason, everything, what did the New York Sirens look like this season in terms of where they finish? I think it's a wide range for this team. If everything clicks in terms of this youth, they could be one of the highest scoring teams in the league. Maybe Kaylee Osborne it proves herself as one of the top goaltenders in the league with this opportunity. I think you have at least a well-rounded defense, even though it's missing some of the high end now with Ella Shelton being gone. I can see a way that this team can finish in a playoff spot as high as the number 3 seed, honestly, if things really work out with Fillier's potential and O'Brien's potential and Kaltunkova's potential, all of that stuff. Like, I can see a way that this team finishes 3rd in the standings. But I think it's a lot more likely they're on the lower end of my range here, and that's as low as number 7, where Osborne maybe can't handle that legit number 1 role, and Shanahan and Doyle are a bit more unknowns as backups. You're missing the high end of Ella Shelton on defense, relying on a couple of players that might be a little mistake prone in Bourbonnais and Rose and some of their results early on in the PWHL. And then obviously you're relying so much on so many young rookies at forward that I think it's very realistic that you just might not get the kind of production you need to be a super competitive team. So I do think that the Sirens finish above last place this season, which at least that's a positive. But I think they could finish anywhere from 3rd to 7th, but most likely in the 5th to 7th range. I'm going to have them finish 6th in my kind of overall predictions. I think they're going to take some steps here. I think they've got a great young core, but I don't think that the young core is going to all come together in terms of being at their peak abilities in year number 1. I think it's going to take at least another year to kind of really get all those players to find their groove going into their sophomore seasons or their junior seasons in the case of players like Sarah Fillier. Very excited to watch this team, though, because there's so much youth at forward, and players like Casey O'Brien are so much fun to watch in terms of their playmaking. Kristen O'Neill, looking for her to have a bounce back. Christina Kaltunkova, who is going to be a chaotic player this season, certainly. Sarah Fillier, and just kind of her immense offensive potential. There's so many fun things to watch for on this New York Sirens team. I think they're going to be playing a lot of fun games this season, and no matter what the score is, with those young talents at forward, they're never going to be out of a game. I think we could see a couple of games this season where the Sirens might be down like 3 or even 4 goals at a point in a game and really make a game out of it and either come back all the way and win it or come back and make a game out of it. So yeah, really excited to watch this New York Sirens team this season. I think they're going to be more competitive than they have been the first 2 seasons, but ultimately fall short of their first playoff berth. That's going to do it for this one and for all of my season previews for the PWHL. If you haven't already, check out some of the other ones. The Sirens begin the season today, if you're watching this, that the day that this was posted, against the Ottawa Charge. So you can either go and check out the Ottawa Charge preview or some of the other teams or whatever you want to do there. But yeah, if this is the only one you've watched, thanks for tuning into this one. If you've caught all of them, really appreciate you tuning into all of those. It was fun to kind of just explore some different topics and just kind of get to ramble on and talk some P-Dub hockey. It's great that we finally got these games back. So thank you for tuning into this one, and I'll catch you next time. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this going into the forward and going into the future here, but I'm sure I'll jump on the horn and be talking some P-Dub before long. So thank you for tuning in again, and I'll catch you next time, whenever that is, chatting P-Dub. Take care.